Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. You'll be happy to know that it's not much warmer in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I left there this morning. It was 37 degrees, so we got a little bit delayed because there was ice on the plane, and they have no de-icing at the Tuscaloosa airport because they usually never need it. So it's been a bit of a journey to get back to New Hampshire today, but we're glad that we're here. I want to introduce you for a quick second to my wife, Mary Pat, who's with us as well today. I want to spend most of my time answering your questions, but I'll say a few things off the top from last night's debate. Let me see, what are these guys are saying? Love thy neighbor and open the border. Hate speech is not free speech. I agree with that. Hate speech doesn't belong on campus. Yep. Free Palestine, not as big on that. My uterus is private property. I'd go for that, sure. All right, so I just want to, oh, wait. Down, oh, and he's getting, give me the finger. That's not very nice. Down with ableism, down with racism, down with transphobia. Now, like, I'm down with all that too, but like, I don't understand why I got the finger on top of it. But what that person doesn't understand is, in New Jersey, that's a sign of respect. So I probably gave exactly the wrong message with that, but we'll explain it to them later. I'll just hit a couple things off the top from the debate last night, because I think it's important to talk about. In my closing statement last night, I asked everybody to picture Election Day 2024, the fall election, and that hopefully everybody in this room will be making their way to their voting place, to go in their voting booth and vote. And that's something that you're going to be able to do that Donald Trump will not be able to do. Because this spring he's going to be convicted of federal felonies. And when you're convicted of a federal felony, your right to vote is taken away from you. I want you to imagine that for a second. If he's the nominee of the Republican Party, he will not be able to vote for himself. Now, you know, I'm sitting here in New England, which is in large part the inspiration for our revolution and the formation. Oh, I didn't read yours either. No human is illegal. I agree with that. Which is in large part the birthplace of our revolution and the freedoms that we live under today and the Constitution that the president swears an oath to, every one of them, since George Washington. And it seems to me that if they had thought about it, Adams and Jefferson and Hamilton and Madison and Franklin, when they were putting together the Constitution and setting up how you qualify to be president of the United States, they put two criteria in there, right? 35 years of age and a natural-born American citizen. If they knew that anybody would have the audacity as a convicted criminal to actually run for president of the United States, I think they would have put in there a third requirement, not a federal felon. I think that should be at least the lowest bar that we have to clear to be able to be president of the United States. And when I said that last night in Alabama, there were part of the crowd that booed me. And I find it really interesting because it's all true. Like, there's really no debate about this. He's going on trial in March, and his own former chief of staff has agreed to an immunity deal to testify to two things: that he committed crimes, the chief of staff, at Donald Trump's direction, and that Donald Trump committed crimes in front of him. Not some like left-wing prosecutor, not some product of the two-tiered system of justice that Donald Trump whines about. No, this is actually a founder of the Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives, and the guy he picked to be his chief of staff and called the next James Baker. This guy now is going to be sitting as far as I am from you, and he's going to be taking an oath and testifying that Donald Trump committed crimes to try to steal the election from Joe Biden in 2020. And when people boo when you say that, they are like a human form of the ostrich. They just want to bury their head in the sand and pretend it's not true. Pretend it's not real. But it is. And our country deserves better than that. And for me as a Republican, it's a grave risk because I personally don't want Joe Biden back as president. That's part of the reason I'm running. But we will not win against Joe Biden if Donald Trump is the nominee. We won't win. He lost 4 years ago to Joe Biden, and he will lose by even more if he's the nominee this time. And the other three folks on the stage, I said this last night, they treat him like he's Voldemort from the Harry Potter books. He shall not be named. You can't hear them utter his name. They're scared, like the folks were in the Harry Potter books. If we say Voldemort's name, he may appear. Well, if it's a debate stage, there's no risk of that. Because that coward won't show up to debate what he's done, what he said, and worse yet, what he plans to do. In 2016, he ran for president and said, "I am your voice." In 2024, he's running for president saying, "I am your retribution." What a great model for the president of the United States. I am your retribution. And let me guarantee you something, since I've known him for 22 years. He won't be anybody's retribution except for himself. He will do nothing as president except to pursue vindictiveness and vendettas and revenge against anybody who dared to speak against him. This is in America. And so my disappointment with Donald Trump is manifest. But my disappointment with my colleagues on the stage last night is almost as bad. Did you see Ron DeSantis last night? He got asked a really simple question. Do you think Donald Trump is fit or not to be president? He started to say things like, well, I'm not a doctor, and I can't. That wasn't the question. I think he's lost a little bit on his fastball. Father Time catches up to all of us. You know, it was like listening to a professional baseball player getting interviewed during a tough season, right? They never really answer the question, why is the team losing so much? And they say, well, you know, we play them one at a time. You know, every day the ball game is different. You know, all we can do is, you know, get 27 outs and see how we do. Like one cliche after another, after another, after another that doesn't answer the question. And all he's looking to do is for the red light in front of us to come on, which means he can stop. And after that answer last night, go back and look at it. He literally does this. He goes, whew. Like when the light goes on, he stops and he lets out a sigh of relief. Like, oh my God, thank God it's over. But it wasn't. Because there's another living human being on the stage. And I said, he doesn't answer the question. Is he fit or not? Answer the question. And last night, Ron didn't not only answer that question, they asked him, would he send troops to try to save the American hostages in Israel? Didn't answer. They asked him, would he send troops to defend Taiwan if China invaded them? Didn't answer. I mean, you know, after a while, as commander-in-chief, your one job is to answer. You have advisors all around you like you are when you're a governor. They make all kinds of recommendations to you, and you're the decider. That's your only job. You're the person empowered to make the decision. Beware of Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley last night who would not answer the questions. If they won't answer them now, when they're begging you for your vote, if you put them in, how much more willing do you think they'll be to answer your questions then, when they have power, and the White House, and Air Force One, and Marine One, and the Secret Service agents and all the rest that comes with the job. That puts them further and further and further away from you. Look, you're not going to like every answer I give. I will guarantee you that. You won't agree with every answer I give, but you will hear every answer I give, and it will be an answer. I will listen to your question, and I will answer it. And that's the least we should expect from someone who wants to be president of the United States. Because I can tell you, from being governor during one of the most trying times in our state's history, during Hurricane Sandy, this doesn't come with a manual. They don't tell you, oh, if a hurricane comes and wipes out 346,000 homes in 24 hours, here's what you do. You have to figure it out. And then you have to make decisions, and you got to live with those decisions. And so you got to live with your decisions too. And in the introduction, I think very appropriately, you talked about New Hampshire's role. Nothing is inevitable. Nothing is inevitable. I don't care what polls say today. New Hampshire's never really cared about that. And I think you guys intentionally lie to the pollsters just to have fun with them sometimes. And I want to remind you that you've seen lots of absolutely certain presidents make their way through this state. President Jeb Bush, absolutely going to be the president, right? President Mitt Romney, absolutely going to be the president, right? Go through the list. President Rudy Giuliani, he was definitely going to be the president in 2008, right? I mean, we can go through the list. It's your choice. It's your call. And more uniquely than any place else in this country, because what you do on January 23rd will make this field smaller. It will narrow the choices for everybody else in this country, for every other state. And that's a huge responsibility. And you all have the opportunity to do that. Last thing I'll say before I take questions is I want to talk particularly to the students that are here. Like, look, I'm here because I want you to be involved. Of course, I want your vote if I can get it. But even if I can't get it, I want you to vote. I want you to participate. And I think my party for too long has ignored the college student vote. Just throwing their hands up and figured they didn't want to put up with the signs and they didn't want to put up with all the rest that comes along with college, coming to a college campus. Well, democracy is messy. And if we want people to participate in the democracy fully, we should come and ask them to. And then accept their answer when they give it, even if they're voting for somebody else. It's my job to convince you to vote for me. And if I do it, great. And if I don't, well, okay. Don't walk away. And I don't want you to walk away even though you're going to be voting for somebody else. Because all the decisions I'm going to make as president, I'm 61 years old. Those decisions are going to affect all of you a hell of a lot more than they're going to affect me. And you need to understand that. Much more of my life is in the rearview mirror than through the windshield. And so what I decide as president, or any person decides as president, is going to affect your lives a heck of a lot more than it's going to affect mine. And so I want you to participate in figuring that out and participate in choosing who that person's going to be. So that's why I think I'm the only candidate so far going around all the college campuses here in New Hampshire. I was up at Franklin Pierce earlier. I'm here. I'm going to UNH. Where else am I going? New England College. Great. Thank you. I still feel like I'm in Tuscaloosa, but I'm going around to campuses, and I've been to Dartmouth. I'm going around to campuses because I'm asking you for your vote, but more important that I'm asking you to make sure you participate. We're going to have voter people. I understand people are having voter registration here a little bit later. If you're not registered to vote here, get registered. Your vote has more of an impact here than it will have any place else in the country. If you're not from New Hampshire and you're from someplace else, I'd tell you register and vote here, because your vote means more here than it will mean in any other state in the country this year. So that's why I'm here. That's the first part. And the second part is I'm here to answer your questions. So we don't do this like some of the other candidates do. If you go to a DeSantis or a Haley town hall, what will happen is their staff picks out who gets to ask the questions. And they talk to those people before. And if you're going to ask a friendly question, you get picked. And if you're going to ask a nasty question or a tough question, or maybe even just a probing question, you don't get picked. What happens here is, except for my buddy Quinn over there, who comes to all the town halls, I don't know anybody else here. And so you raise your hand, I'm going to call on you, someone will bring you a microphone, and I'll answer your question. And I don't know whether it's going to be somebody who supports me, doesn't support me, thinks I'm great, thinks I'm a jerk. I don't know, but we'll find out. And that's the fun part of these things. So let's get going. Someone's got to start by raising their hands. Since I've had my back to them most of the time, I'm going to start with them. So let me start with you. And here, you take mine.
Thank you very much. First things first, I'd like to say thank you for coming. It's very important that we share ideals here, especially at a college campus. A big concern as a conservative is obviously the border. We practically have open borders at the moment. It feels like a Trojan horse has come over. It feels like a Trojan horse has come over the board. We practically have open borders, as we all can agree as conservatives. Watching videos of just the mass amount of people coming over the border, and especially Mexico dumping prisoners and having terrorists come over like Hamas through the border, it's very important that we close it. So I just wanted to know, how would you as president tackle the border?
It's a good question, and I think you shouldn't limit it to just as conservatives. We know it's an open border. It just is factually an open border, and here are the facts. In the last 11 months, there have been 200,000, the average is 200,000 illegal encounters a month. So if that's not an open border objectively, I don't know what is. Now, I'll go back to last night. Here's part of the problem with the way some of the candidates address this issue. And Ron DeSantis got asked about it last night. He got asked, you advocating that anybody who comes over the border with a backpack on gets shot stone cold dead because you assume they're a drug dealer because they have a backpack on. Let me tell you, I want the border to be closed, but I'm not going to be asking American law enforcement officers and National Guards men and women to indiscriminately shoot people as they come over the border because they have a backpack on. And that's TV tough guy talk, because you're frustrated, not frustrated about the border. He wants to appeal to that frustration. And so what he wants you to do is say, look, DeSantis, he's just going to kill these guys. Good, good. That means less of people will come over the border illegally. No, wrong. That is a stupid solution to a complicated problem. So let me give you mine. It's 5 steps because it's a big problem. Step number 1 is on day 1, I would sign an executive order to send the National Guard to the border to partner with Customs and Border Patrol officers who are overwhelmed. 200,000 a month. They are overwhelmed by the number of people. They need help. And that's what the National Guard is there for. It's the guard internally inside the United States, different than the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, which are for external threats. That's for internal threats. Send the National Guard there. That's step 1. Step 2, hire 10,000 new Customs and Border Patrol officers because the current number are not sufficient. So we need to add 10,000, I think, to that number. But to be honest with you, that's going to take a year because you got to recruit them, you have to train them, and then deploy them. So what you would do is, that's why you send the National Guard there in step 1. And then every time you get another tranche of Customs and Border Patrol officers, you can take the same number of National Guardsmen and women and take them back to their home bases. Step 3, 200,000 illegal encounters a month. You know how many detention beds to detain people we have at the border? 38,000. So look, I went to law school because I couldn't do math or science. But let me tell you, even I could do that math. Not good. 200,000 illegal encounters, 38,000 beds. Numbers don't work. So I would double the number of beds to 80,000. That will also take a year to do because you got to build the camps and you got to build all the facilities you need to detain people in a humane way. Bathrooms, kitchens, all the other things that you need. So that'll take a year to do. But we need to do it because problem number 4 is if they're claiming asylum, that they're leaving for political persecution, they get a hearing. You know how long it takes to get a hearing now? 4 years. 4 years. So what do? We can't detain them for 4 years. So you know what we do? We release them into the country. And we say, come back here to El Paso in 4 years to have your hearing. Well, let me just tell you, if you think that hearing may result in you being sent back, you're not coming. You're going to disappear into this huge country and take your chances. So we need to triple the number of immigration judges. And that will bring us down to a year for that hearing, and you could detain people for that period of time if you increase the beds. And then 5th, we got to change the immigration laws because the root of all this problem is that people are coming in illegally because the immigration laws are so illogical as to how people get in. So, for instance, we've got 6 million vacant jobs right now in this country. In this economy, 6 million vacant jobs. So what do we do about that? What we've always done over time is we've allowed people who are willing to do those jobs to immigrate here and fill those jobs, pay taxes, learn the language, and grow our economy, and benefit from it themselves as well by having the freedoms and the economic opportunity that comes with working in this country. We should also have E-Verify so that every employer who wants to hire someone can verify definitively whether someone's here legally or illegally. So for 2 things, so an illegal person doesn't get hired, and so that businesses don't take advantage of people who are here illegally and skirt our tax system and potentially don't treat them well. But to get those things, which are more conservative values, the Democrats are going to want something. They're not going to give it to us for nothing. And the fact is, for 20 years, both sides have dug their heels in and said, I'm not giving anything. And so what do we have? We have 20 years later, after the last time we tried to do it with President Bush, we have a much worse situation. So part of this is you're going to have to trust me to make a deal. I have to give them something. I don't know what it's going to be. Is it something about Dreamers or is it something about Path to Citizenship? I don't know. But I'll go and try to negotiate the very best deal that I can to make the system better. And if we do those 5 things, you're not going to have 200,000 people trying to stream over the border. And then it becomes an easier task for law enforcement because then most of the people who are going to be trying to get over are people who are committing crimes. And then it makes it much easier to do the kind of arresting and law enforcement that you need to do. So it's a longer answer than shoot 'em stole cold dead on the border, granted. It's a little less sexy, I would admit, but I have to tell you, it'll work. And that's where we want to get to. Because what I want to do is have the government work in a way that drains away that frustration. That I could tell from the way you're asking the question that you feel about watching this happen. And let's face it, this is a law enforcement problem in the end because we don't know who's coming over the border. And you can be sure over the last 6 months, over 200 people who were on the terrorist watch list tried to get in. So they're coming. And that's a danger for everybody in this country. We don't know where those people ultimately land and what they'll do when they get there. But it will not be something that'll be good for the country and probably something that'll cost lives. So that's the way I would go about it. Thanks for your question. Sure.
Good afternoon.
Sure.
Oh, great. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good. That's good. My name's Tom Spanks, and I'm a resident of Keene. And I've been watching you lately to kind of bone up on exactly who you are, what you stand for. And I got a couple of questions. But
all right.
I'll ask this first one. It has to do with mental illness. And I found some interesting information. regarding mental illness and mass shootings. And I'll read this. The gun lobby, the NRA, ILA, has perpetuated the myth that mass shootings are caused by people who have a mental illness. However, a study done by the DOJ, the FBI, in 2018, covering the years from 2000 to 2013, concluded that most assailants had not been diagnosed with mental illness. Therefore, does that not indicate that it's guns which are the problem and not necessarily mental illness? Australia has 0 mass shootings.
I just think because someone has not been diagnosed with mental illness doesn't mean they don't have it. A large part of the problem in this country is that we don't have enough caregivers, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, nurses who provide this care for folks who are in desperate need of both diagnosis and then ultimately treatment to be seen. And so it doesn't necessarily follow to me that because someone is not diagnosed doesn't mean they don't have it. That would be like talking about any other disease. Well, certain people have been diagnosed with cancer, or they have been diagnosed with heart disease, but then they die of a heart attack. Does that mean they didn't have heart disease before? It doesn't. And so I do think when you look at these individual cases and you break them down, every one that I've heard of, including the one that just happened in Maine a few weeks ago, has involved people who have real significant mental health issues. Now, the one in Maine, he was in fact diagnosed. And the one in Maine, his own family went to law enforcement and said they were concerned about his health. He had been institutionalized before. His employer, the United States Army, went to law enforcement and told them that they were concerned about his mental health and that they had, in fact, as the Army, taken any access to weapons away from him. Yet, he was not institutionalized again, nor was he given access to care to try to help him. And we wound up with 18 people murdered in Maine by this guy. And so I'm sure there are exceptions. And I have not said that every case of mass shooting involves people who are mentally ill. But I do believe that most of the cases you see of the mass shootings in this country involve people who have either diagnosed, as the case in Maine, or undiagnosed mental illness. And part of what I suggest is that getting rid of any one class of weapon is not going to end this problem. The gun deaths in Maine, for instance, last year, 98% of the gun deaths in Maine involved handguns, not AR-15s or other type of semi-automatic weapons. So if we got rid of AR-15s and we got rid of 2% of the gun deaths, is that really solving the problem? It seems to me it isn't. And by the way, of those 98% that were handguns, over 60% of the gun deaths in Maine last year were suicide. It seems to me when someone commits suicide, whether they were diagnosed as having mental illness or not, no one commits suicide without significant mental health problems, whether they're diagnosed or undiagnosed. It may be valid, sir. Like, it. Right. And you're look, let's go back to where you started. Do I think that the study by DOJ is valid? It very well may be. But that's not my point. They may have said that there's, not with no one with diagnosed with mental health issues. But that was the whole point I was trying to make, is that a part of the reason why we don't have more diagnosed folks with mental health issues is because we don't have enough people to provide that care. And your point on semi-automatic handguns is just reinforcing the point I'm trying to make. You could slice this any number of different ways. And manufacturers of firearms are very clever in terms of the way they do some of the categorization of these weapons. I just don't believe that the elimination of any particular type of weapon beyond the ones that are banned now, fully automatic weapons are banned in this country now, is going to improve the situation. I don't think that's the issue. I think it's the people that pull the triggers that are the issues. The guns, without the people pulling the triggers, don't create deaths. It's the people pulling the triggers that create the deaths. And I mean, I don't want to. I would love to talk to you more about it, but I want to get to some other questions, so I don't want us to turn this into a debate between me and you. But I think you know my position, and it sounds to me like you don't agree with it, which would fit into the category of what I talked about in the beginning, which is you'll know my opinion, and I think you recitated it accurately, and it looks like we may not agree on it. And so I think we just have to agree to disagree, but I will let you know that I'll continue to think about these issues and continue to listen to people about these issues, both people who are expert and people who are everyday citizens who have experience with it. And at some point, someone may change my mind, but that's where my mind is at the moment. So thank you, sir. Yes.
This is kind of similar, but going in a different direction.
Okay.
If you're saying that this is more on not enough people getting diagnosed with mental illness, not enough people getting that treatment, not enough psychiatrists and therapists in the world, what's the direction you want to go to fix that issue?
Sure.
Especially since I'm personally a psych major, I want to go into therapy, but when looking
Well, I
at
got good news for you.
when looking at grad school, that's almost I'm having to expect to take the debt of a house. And that's going to stay with me for the rest of life. So why would college students want to go into something where they're going to be in debt?
See, I'm about to answer that question for you. Because I believe instead of having broad forgiveness of student debt, which is what President Biden wants to do, I want to forgive student debt to incentivize people to go into areas where we need help. So the good news for you is, if I'm president and you go in and you go to graduate school and you commit the next 5 years of your life to providing that treatment, I'm going to forgive your student debt. Because we need people in those areas. I want to use student debt forgiveness smartly to try to encourage people. Like for physicians, I want to use it for psychiatrists. For physicians, I also want to use it for general practitioners because we don't have enough people to provide well care for people. We got plenty of people who will take care of you once you're sick. We have very few doctors who are willing to become general practitioners to be able to teach you how not to get sick and how to live a healthier life. So for those areas where we have a shortage in our medical, and there are other areas too, but talk about providing medical care, that's the way I would incentivize you to do it, because I know you've got that question. Like, how am I going to do this? Why would I take on a couple $100,000 in debt or more? And then how am I going to make that up? How am I ever going to buy a house for myself? How am I ever going to be able to save money? How am I going to do all that stuff? If you're willing to go into an area where we have a real need as a country, the country should reward you for that because you're providing a service to us that we really, really need. And so I'm not for broad forgiveness of student debt, but I am for forgiveness of student debt in areas where we need it. And that's the way I would incentivize you to try to do that. You got something else? Right. It is expensive. I would require all insurance companies to cover that care because the downside of not covering it, these folks either wind up dead, hurting others or themselves. They wind up with other very significant physical issues, often when trying to cause harm to themselves, that we wind up paying for with charity care or Medicaid in hospitals that, as you know, as you're studying this stuff, is the least efficient way to provide that care and the least effective way, but the most expensive way to provide it. So yeah, I would require insurance companies to provide coverage for mental health and addiction treatments, both, because we had 110,000 people die of overdoses in this country last year. It is now the leading killer among 18 to 34-year-old men. And if we don't deal with that issue by providing the type of treatment they need to get them back to a place where they're not in active addiction, we're just going to have more deaths. And that's not where we should go. We are not going to fix the drug problem in this country by throwing addicts in jail. The people we should put in jail are the people who profit from it, the drug dealers. But the addicts need to be treated and can be treated. And we have much more available to us to treat addicts now than we did 20 years ago. And so that's the way I would deal with that issue. So don't give up. I think you can contribute an enormous amount to helping people, but we have to give you a reason not to live the rest of your life in debt or wait till you're 40 to buy a house. And so I understand the problem, and that's been the solution. I've been talking about that for months now, long before your question. Ask Quinn, he's heard it, because he's been at all the town hall meetings. So I think it's a really important thing. It's a great question. And I hope that something like that would encourage you to do something that it sounds like you may already have a passion for anyway. All right, we go over here. Yes, ma'am, right there.
Kind of along a similar line, I am a Keene resident here, and my husband and I both work for nonprofits. We have 2 little kids, and none of our employers are able to offer us health care. So when you're speaking about insurance providers being able to do that, I agree. I think insurance providers absolutely should do that. But what's your plan for making insurance itself more affordable and covering more of the population here?
The first thing I would tell you about that is that I think the biggest problem that we have in terms of making things affordable are the cost of prescription drugs. Because as medicine has evolved now, the overwhelming majority of people have illnesses that are treated preferably not with hospital treatment or regular doctor's visits, but with prescription drugs. And those prescription drugs, as you know, even when you have insurance, can be extraordinarily expensive. And so that's where most people fall down in their ability to be able to get the help that they need, is not being able to get access to the medicine at an affordable price, whether they have insurance or they don't. So one of the first things I would do is get rid of these middlemen that we have in the pharmacy benefit managers. Those are the folks that own that middle space. So the pharmaceutical companies develop the drugs, and for most pharmaceutical companies, they're giving rebates on their drugs anywhere from 50 to 75% that are supposed to go to you so you can afford it, except they have the pharmacy benefit managers in between. They usually take at least 2/3 or more of that money for managing the situation, and very little of the rebate gets to you. If a prescription drug, even if you didn't have insurance, was 75 or 80% off the list price, it's much more likely you could afford it than if it was at only 10% off a list price or even at list price. And these folks provide no service that affects you. And they make tens of billions of dollars a year, these middlemen. And the reason why I know it's a really lucrative business, and you'll know it as soon as I tell you who has now bought up most of those businesses, the insurance companies. So the insurance companies are charging you or me for insurance if you can get it. Then they're skimming off with these pharmacy benefit managers 2/3 of a 75 or 80% discount on every pill that we buy. And that's how you know they can make so much money and why it costs us so much money. So I think the first thing I would do is to get at those folks, because I think that would make lots of things more affordable. Now, on obtaining health insurance itself, we don't have a free and open enough market to allow for competition. So one of the things I would do is to get rid of this state-by-state mandates on health insurance. Let the entire country compete. Let companies from all over the country compete with each other to provide health insurance to you. When each state only allows certain folks to be licensed in their state, and by definition it sets up a very small competitive window, there's no incentive for those guys to try to beat each other on price, because your employer or you yourself may only have 2 or 3 choices in a state, and they're all going to be too expensive for either you to afford individually or for your employer to be able to afford. You know, before I got into this race, and still today, I have a small business where I employ 6 other people. The health insurance, and I pay for 90% of the premium for my employees. It costs me $15,000 a month to provide health insurance for my employees. And it's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. I mean, you know, that means I've got to make $180,000 in a year net after taxes just to pay for my employees' health insurance. Now, I do it because I think it's important, and I'm fortunate enough that my business had been successful enough that I could do it. But it's ridiculous. And in my state, literally when we go out to get bids, because we do it every June is when mine turns around. Last year, there were only 2 companies who were willing to even offer it to me in my state. I think competition is the way to get rid of that. If there were 15 companies who were allowed to compete from all over the country for my business, I got a feeling that the price would be a lot lower and a lot more affordable. And I could look at what they offer and see whether I think it's something that's good for my employees and show it to my employees, which is what I do in my business, is I show them what the coverage are like. Some of them have children, some of them don't. So the plans matter to them in terms of what they cover. I think more competition is what we have to do. The problem with Obamacare was the promise was it was going to create that competition and an exchange in every state and everyone's going to be able to compete, and it didn't. And I think whenever you get government more involved, it tends to get more bureaucratic, more complicated, and less effective. So I would open it up all across the country for people to compete for it, because there's a lot of money to be made still, even at affordable prices, because most people are healthy. Most people pay for insurance and don't use it that much, especially when you're younger. Me, you start to use it more. But the fact is, that's the way I would do it, because I think any other system that we've tried hasn't shown itself to be effective. Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, in the same way I would require that mental health and addiction services have to be covered. Once you have insurance, it's only worth anything if you can use it. And yes, that will make it somewhat more expensive. We have to find a balance, but that's why the competition should bring that balance, because even if you permit pre-existing conditions to be covered, which I would, the fact is that most people don't have pre-existing conditions, and most people won't use that coverage in the insurance, but they're still going to pay for it. So if I don't have any pre-existing conditions, but you do, and we're in the same insurance pool, you're not paying more than I am for the same coverage. We're paying the same. And so I cover for part of that cost for you. Well, the more people you get into that pool to compete, the lower you can drive that price down, because you divide the number by a bigger number of people. So that's why I think the competition is the biggest part of that. But yeah, pre-existing conditions is just a sham that the insurance companies came up with in order not to pay you for something. Like, everybody has a pre-existing condition of some kind at some point, I suspect, because we all have certain diseases or illnesses that we get that are genetic, and our genes come right from the beginning. So yeah, it's a bit of a scam, to tell you the truth. All right, yeah.
So as a student here at Keene State, well on my way to becoming a social studies teacher within the next year, education is very important to me. So I was wondering what your position was to help parents get their rights back for what is taught in the schools, and does that involve altering the Department of Education's role in that policy?
Sure. We talked a little bit about this last night if you watched the debate. We had a real argument about what parents' rights are. I am an unabashed and complete parental rights advocate. I think parents should be making every decision that their underage children are not legally permitted to make. And I don't think the government should have anything to say about those decisions. I mean, think about this, for instance. In my state, under the current governor, you can have a kid in school who tells, underage, let's say 15, who tells their teacher, you're going to be the teacher soon, comes up to you and says, you know, I'm a boy, but I feel like I'm a girl, and I'm really confused about my gender, and I want to do something about it, and I trust you because you're a great teacher, and I want to tell you. In my state, you're not allowed to tell their parents. You're not allowed to tell their parents. But if my daughter comes to you at 15 years old and she's in the midst of her menstrual cycle and she has cramps, you have to get my signature for her to take Advil. Okay? So how screwed up is this? I have to not only be told that she has cramps by the school, but they have to get my permission for her to take 2 Advil. But if my son comes to you and says that he's confused about his gender, you are required not to tell me. We have gone off the deep end in this country. Nobody loves our children more than me and my wife. We have 4 of them. Nobody understands them better than we do. Nobody cares about their future more than we do. Nobody cares about their health and well-being more than we do. You could be the best teacher in the school, but you won't know my kids as well as we do. And you don't want to be my substitute parent. You want to be their social studies teacher. I want you to do that. As far as the Department of Education, I would get rid of it. We don't need a federal Department of Education. We have boards of education in every locality. In some states, they have county boards of education, and in most states, they have a state board of education. For God's sake, enough. And I'd take the $80 billion that we spend every year in the Department of Education federally, and I would distribute that to states who allowed parents to choose where to send their kids to school. Parents should decide where their kids should go to school. Look, I went to public school. I'm a product of the public schools in New Jersey, and I got a great public school education there. Mary Pat grew up in Pennsylvania. She went to parochial school from K to 12. That's what her parents wanted. So when we got married and we had kids, all our kids went to parochial school. So you know who makes the decisions in my house. But the fact is that we had the ability to do that, right? A lot of parents don't have the ability to make that choice. And some of them are stuck. I've already seen you. You don't have to come over there. And their parents are stuck if the school is not a good school, if the school is teaching values that are inconsistent with theirs. They're stuck. They have to send their children there because they don't have the financial wherewithal to take them someplace else. We should use that $80 billion to give them the chance to do that. And any states that gave them that unfettered right would get a chunk of that money. I don't think, we wonder why we have so many issues in our country, and a lot of them, in my view, are because we're diminishing the role of parents. And we're giving parents an excuse not to be parents and to let other people substitute to be their parent. The same way I said when Hurricane Sandy came that there was no manual telling me what to do. I can remember when we brought our oldest child home, who's now 30 years old. But I remember like yesterday when we brought him home the first time, my parents left. They were there to help us bring him home. And they left, and there Mary Pat and I sitting there, and he's in the bassinet. And we said, oh, my God, now what do we do? Like, there's no manual for that either. But the manual for that is love. And nobody loves their child more than their mom and dad. And are we going to have some bad parents out there? Yes. It happens. But it's not the rule. It's the exception. And so as a social studies teacher, what I want you to focus on is teaching kids about the world around them. And whatever aspect of social studies winds up being the class you get or the concentration, whether it's European history or U.S. history or whether it's plain civics or whatever it is, I want you to be focused on one thing and one thing only. Help my child reach his fullest or her fullest potential. And if they do, I suspect you'll be a teacher for your whole life, because there can't be anything more rewarding than standing at the front of a classroom for 9 months and watching children in front of you get smarter and more inquisitive and better. And so I'm glad you're going into teaching. I think it's great, and we should free you up to do what you do, and not, bless you, and not wind up burdening you with stuff that should be our responsibility as a parent, not yours as a teacher. So thanks for the question. It's really going. All right. You tell me I can take 2 more questions. I'll get to you last. I'll go to you next. Oh, no. I meant the guy in front. Oh, sorry about that. I meant you.
Thank you, Governor.
Sure.
This is not a personal question, but a complicated one. I hope you can consolidate it.
Okay, I'll try.
Borders, drugs, the violence that's happening in Gaza and Israel, Russia, China. I'm a couple of years older than you. They've always been here, but the voices and the Congress and the Senate, it's just getting louder and louder and more confusing. How can you center all that as a president? How can you bring everybody together and everybody just calm down and listen to each other and constructively? How can you use your tools and your experience to do that?
That's a good question. Listen, only a president can do that in our system. Only a president has the bully pulpit, the attention of the American people in an intense enough way to try to change that. And this is one of my big problems with Donald Trump. He doesn't want to make that better. He wants to make it worse. You hear him, the names that he's calling everybody, and all the people that he hates. I mean, if you haven't seen this, if you're even considering voting for Donald Trump, and I'm sure there's people in here who are, I want you to go on his social media site, on Truth Social, and look at the post that he put up at 2:03 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning. First of all, I think you need to wonder about someone who is posting on social media at 2:03 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning when they're 77 years old. But maybe he couldn't sleep. He goes through a list of what he's thankful for, how thankful he is for all the people he hates. That's his Thanksgiving message to America. If you have a president who carries himself that way, you're going to get what you've got right now. And then we have a president who comes after him who can't complete a paragraph. I mean, look, I've known Joe Biden, Mary Pat and I have known Joe Biden for 40 years. We met him when we were undergraduates at the University of Delaware. And he's a very nice man. When we got to know him, when we were in our 20s, I always found Joe Biden to be conversational, friendly, a nice guy. But he's too old for the job. It's just that simple. And you don't, that's not being nasty. The first time I said this, one of my daughters said to me, "That's ageist." And I didn't know what that was initially, but then I found out that means I was being discriminatory based on age. And I was like, no, it's just the truth. Being president of the United States is the hardest job in the world. And you got to have all your energy, all your faculties, all your skills to even have a shot to do it well. And so while Joe Biden campaigned saying he was going to bring the country together, he didn't, in my view, for 2 reasons. One, because he went far left when he got in, contrary to what he told us during the campaign, that he was going to govern as a moderate. And secondly, he just doesn't have the energy to use the bully pulpit every day. We need a president who's going to be out there every day talking to us about the greatness of this country, talking to us about the problems, but how we're going to try to solve them, not just argue about them. Not yelling and screaming at the top of his lungs every day and telling you who to hate. Not this debate that was yesterday, but the one before that. I said that a president can only bring Americans together if he opens his heart to every American and does that as an example to the rest of the country about what I would want you to do with your neighbor. Not that you're going to agree on everything. We're not going to live in a Pollyanna world. In fact, this country was set up to be an argument. Different branches of government, checks and balances, wanting to argue with each other, but arguing towards accomplishing something, not just arguing for the sake of arguing. You watch these jokers in Washington now in the Congress. It took them 3 weeks to pick a speaker in their own party, right? And then you had in the Senate, they had 400 military officers who had earned promotions, who they refused to promote because they were in an argument about something else, and they were holding these men and women in uniform, serving our country hostage to their promotions and raises and career opportunities that, they earned. A president needs to lower the temperature. A president needs to do some of the things that I did in New Jersey. Now, look, I am not a wallflower, as you know. But there's a big difference between using the bully pulpit to advocate for a position you believe in and putting up a Thanksgiving post to talk about all the people you hate and saying, as I said off the top, I am your retribution, right? So I would lead by example. And the example I would try to set is to be strong and to be tough and to be certain, because you deserve that, but also to remind you as often as I possibly could how lucky we are to live in this country, how blessed we are to be American citizens, how important it is for us to welcome others into this country legally and make them a part of the fabric of this country. How important it is for us to set an example in the White House for every child in this country. There should be no parent in this country who shouldn't be able to point to the White House and say, I don't agree, or maybe I agree or disagree with the president, but he's a good man or a good woman. We can't say that because Donald Trump is not a good man. He's not. And so, but you watched that debate last night, and they won't say it out loud. They all say it privately. I'm here to tell you, I'm in those rooms. They all say it privately, but they don't have the guts to say it publicly. Setting an example is not only saying and talking about the good things, but it's telling the truth consistently so that even when they disagree with it, people say, well, I disagree with him, but he's telling the truth as he sees it. He's not lying about it. He's not saying that an election got stolen when it didn't and undercutting people's confidence in our democracy. Those are things that are really important. And I think that's the best you can do as a president, but that's a lot. And you think about some of the men we've had in that job who have done it. I just got done writing a book about Ronald Reagan that's going to come out in a couple of months. And one of the things that struck me in doing all the research for that book was his essential goodness and how much he loved this country and its people and expressed that every day. We need to get back to that.
I've kind of got a two-parter here. Your critics say that you wear your pants too high. I want to give you a chance to say if it's an issue with public, like a pantsing attack. And as this is the two, I have more questions. Okay. And the second part is, as president, do you think we could see your pants even higher?
That's an example of one of the reasons that political candidates are reluctant at times to come to college campuses. Because tonight, wherever he goes or whatever he does, whatever the local bar is here, or whatever, he'll be telling all of his friends, you won't believe what the hell I said to this Christie guy who's running for president of the United States under the guise of a question about the serious problems we have in the country. But that's no reason not to take his question and no reason not to come here. I'm not answering that. It's completely ridiculous. But the fact is that it's an example of the way you need to deal when you're in leadership with anybody in this country. Everybody deserves the respect of being called on. Everybody deserves the respect of being listened to. And if, when you listen to them, they actually ask you something like this guy did that makes some sense and, is relevant not only to him, but to lots of other people in this audience, then he deserves a serious and thoughtful answer. If, on the other hand, you're asking me a question about my pants, I will tell you this, like, if you're looking for a fashion model for President of the United States, I come in probably in the current field a distant third, right? But nonetheless, the good thing from my perspective is that will not be the sole criteria for determining most people's vote. And then they'll have time to listen to the other things that I have to say about the really important issues of the country and be able to make a thoughtful decision on what their vote is going to be, whether it could be for me or for one of the other people in the race. I guess I'm going to take one more because I really don't want to end the town hall here on the pants question. How about you right there? He's got to bring you a mic.
Hi, I'm Zach Lino. I'm Vice President of the current Climate Action Group on campus, EcoReps.
I didn't hear it.
Climate Action
Okay.
Group. And my question for you is, what are you going to do to address the worsening effects of climate change on our country?
Well, first thing is, let me say that I believe that climate change is real, and I believe that human activity contributes to it. And I think that if we don't start from that basic premise, then we don't have anything to talk about. Secondly, I think that we have to do broader things in terms of the way we provide energy in this country. I am for an all-of-the-above strategy on this, but I would put much more of an emphasis on nuclear power for the things that you're concerned about. Now, in my home state, we're the most densely populated state in the country, yet 53% of our electricity is provided by nuclear. So if for 50 years we've been operating nuclear power safely and reliably in our state, in the most densely populated state, where it could be conceivably the most dangerous place to do it, it can be done. And the technology is so much better today than it was 20 years ago, that it's much more safe, much more efficient, and has absolutely zero impact on the carbon footprint and the problems that creates for climate. So in my administration, there would be real incentives for states to start permitting the building of new nuclear power plants. Second, what happens here in New England is antithetical to fixing this problem. New York, in order to solve the climate problem, says they're not going to allow you to build natural gas pipelines across New York to come and provide natural gas here. So you would think, oh, well, that's because there is some carbon footprint to the burning of natural gas, and so they're trying. So if, in fact, all of the heat in this region were provided then by hydropower or by wind or solar, you'd say, well, what a great idea by the state of New York. But no. What happens here as a practical matter is you burn home heating oil. Not here, because we're pretty cold, but in lots of places you burn home heating oil, which is much more polluting than natural gas. So I think we have to step to where we need to go in terms of providing for that type of power. So I would permit pipelines to be built from Pennsylvania here to New England to allow natural gas to become a substitute for home heating oil. You're lowering the carbon footprint, and it's not a permanent solution, but it is a next step solution. While we work on hydro, wind, and solar. Now, when I was governor of New Jersey, we were the second largest solar energy producing state in the country, believe it or not, in New Jersey. And we invested a lot to get there, but it still only provided about 4% of our overall daily power needs. So we have to continue to invest in solar and in wind to get it to the point where it can provide a much greater percentage of the load every day. And so that's the way I would go about it. And the last piece of this is the Chinese, because they are the largest country in the world, burning the most coal anywhere in the world. You look at what the United States has done in the last 10 years through a lot of the steps that we've taken with a lot of different things, electric vehicles and others. We've lowered our carbon output by 1 billion tons a year, every year for the last 10 years. In that same 10-year period, the Chinese have increased their carbon output by 5 billion tons a year. So one of the other things we've got to think about as a country is diplomatically, how do we get the Chinese on board in dealing with this problem? Because if we don't get them on board, we can't fix the problem by ourselves. There's 3.5 times more Chinese than there are us, and their needs, I've already seen those signs, their needs for power are significantly more than ours, just by the numbers, right? So the last piece of dealing with the climate agenda, I think, is that we've got to diplomatically get the Chinese to start considering alternative energies as well. Because if we don't, we're never going to fix this problem. In the end, if we don't acknowledge that it's going on, we can't fix it. And if we don't acknowledge it's going on, we're a failure as a generation. Because you deserve to have clean water and clean air. And someday, if you have children, they deserve to have clean water and clean air. And if we continue down the path we're on, they won't. And that is a sin, in my view. We were given, no matter what your religious faith is, I don't believe all this got here like by some kind of freak accident. This is a gift to us, and it's a trust. And we have an ability to be able to maintain that trust. But to do that, you can't do stuff like Vivek did last night, going on and on about the climate hoax. And I think that's what he used his closing statement for, I think. It's not. Science tells us it's not. Now, I don't agree with every part of a green agenda that Joe Biden's put forward. And I think, when you've got 12 months of inventory of electric vehicles, that non-Teslas, because no one wants to buy them. Look, if we want to use electric vehicles in this country, I'm fine with that. Make ones that people want to buy. Like, there's no big backlog on Tesla. People like those cars, so they buy them. GM and Ford are building these cars. No one wants to buy them, right? So we should let the market make this decision for us on electric vehicles. When you want an electric vehicle and you see one you like and you can afford, you're going to go buy it. Because not only will it fill the needs for your transportation, but you'll feel better about what you're doing to help the environment. That's why I think you've seen Tesla become so successful and why Elon Musk is the richest person in the world, right? He got a lot of government assistance, but he also had a good idea, and he executed on it well. We need to continue to encourage that type of innovation. And I think if we do, not doing it artificially, like, the governor in my state now says, no more gas vehicles after 2035. Okay, I guess, but I get concerns when people like the governor of California this summer put out an advisory saying, don't plug in your electric vehicle because if you do, it'll crash the grid. Well, an electric vehicle that's not plugged in is a planter. Right? Doesn't do anything for you. So we need to do all these things that I talked about with nuclear power, whatever, to increase the reliability, the capacity of the grid, to be able to then expand those other options for people and make them more available. And if we do that, people will go for it. People like innovation, and they like the new thing. And, I remember when I had a good friend of mine who, when the iPhones came out, yeah, I'm old. When the iPhones came out, he had a flip phone. And another friend of mine had a BlackBerry. And they're like, I will never give up my flip phone. I love it. It's amazing. And the other guy said, damn right, I love my BlackBerry. I'm never giving it up. Guess what? Like, by iPhone 5, they were like, yeah, give me one of those, Americans love innovation, and I think we'll go for it, especially when we know that it's something that will also help us with our stewardship of the environment, because it's part of what our responsibility is. And I think candidates who don't acknowledge that are letting you down. So, thank you. Thank you. I want to thank the students that have come today. I'll answer your question as we go out because I got to now go to another campus. So I don't want to be too late for them. But I want to thank all of you for coming today. The students who came today, I particularly thank you. If you're not registered to vote, go register to vote. Make sure you do. January 23rd, you've got an opportunity to change the course of history. You're going to want to be a part of that. You're going to want to be a part of that. Our country needs to move in a new direction. You can be part of making that happen. That's why I'm here, is to encourage you to do that. I hope you do it by voting for me, but if you don't, just make sure you go and vote for somebody, because it's your responsibility as an American and it's your privilege as an American, and I hope that you take advantage of it. So thanks for letting me come by and visit. I appreciate it.